we can liberate ourselves and others to be the best individuals that we can be. But then at the same time, I realize, when I was born, I had parents and they took care of me, and like any baby, no baby is free, so to speak. Babies become free because somebody feeds them, somebody loves them. Little children become more free because they go to school and begin to learn to read and write and make friends. Families give freedom. And then friends help us find our freedoms. And then ultimately communities help us find our freedom. In fact, maybe find isn't even the right word. Maybe they give us our freedom. And it reminds me again of the roots of the word freedom and the word friend. And I've mentioned it before, but for me it's pretty fundamental. The ancient Germanic roots of both words come from the same root, meaning beloved, freedom, friend. And the truth is, all the freedom we have is something that has been given to us by everyone we're connected to in our lives. We give each other freedom. Here, you give me a kind of freedom, especially as a Unitarian Universalist. I couldn't have without you and without my community, the larger community of Unitarian Universalists in this nation. So I'm realizing that on July 4th, I'm really feeling like celebrating 2 days, Independence Day and Interdependence Day. Welcome this morning. As we gather, I invite you to share in our covenant, and I light the chalice. Love is the spirit of his fellowship, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. I invite you to sing with me. This is fun. So we changed the words a little bit. Michael recommended this, and I haven't sung this in years. I'm really looking forward to it. Oh, beautiful. And here are the words. I invite you to stand in body or in spirit as you would like.
Yeah.
It's been many years now since I was talking with Harold. Harold grew up in Jamaica till he was about 10, then came to the United States with his family. And Harold is this, he's tall, he's got this beautiful, rich brown skin, very dark skin. I actually like to look at his skin. He just kind of glows. He's a really beautiful person. And a beautiful soul, too. And he called me up one day and he said, "Can I talk? I just need to talk to you, Reverend Joel." And I said, "Of course." And so we met. We were in the sanctuary, the meeting room of the church where I was serving at the time. And he began to tell me about a very difficult experience he'd had. He had gone back to Jamaica to visit some family, and when he came back, the border, I don't think they call them border, the immigration authorities at the American border, when he'd flown back into, I think it was Florida. And they were really quite mean to him, and they did some really mean things that they didn't have to do at all. And it was just painful, and he was describing the painful experience he had, and he was mad. He was really angry about what had happened to him. And he was angry at me. And I wasn't sure why he was angry at me, but I was realizing it was really important. He felt like he could talk to me about how angry he was. And when he finished telling me the story, he thanked me. And he said, I thank you for just listening to me, Joel. I have not been able to tell that story to anybody because I get so angry. And to be honest, I wasn't sure you would even listen to me because it was a particular experience specific to being a black man and having to deal with law enforcement in the United States. And he said, "I really appreciate that you just listened." And I was very glad that I did. And from that day, I got to thinking a lot about what is it about anger? I remember when I was a kid, boys were allowed to have you were allowed to be a little angry if you were a boy, but not too much. But if you were a girl, never allowed to be angry at all. And when I was a kid, nobody ever talked about non-binary people or transgender people, but I don't know if they would have been allowed to be angry or not. But I've come to appreciate the message that comes out of the feelings of anger. It has a purpose for us in our existence as human beings. I'm going to think more about that here in the service this morning. Part of how to be both free and connected at the same time. It's a powerful emotion for that. Milestones, passages, gratitudes. In this ritual of acknowledging the importance of our connections and the power in our presence to one another, the power of our friendship, the power of creating community together, we're pulled back to an awareness of what it means. And so with gratitude, we share milestones that are given to us to share aloud, gratitudes, passages. So George Hayes wrote, I am back in Morristown Medical Center for another week. I'm scheduled to be transferred to rehab as early as tomorrow, which would have been yesterday, so hopefully he's there now. Maybe another week. bacterial pneumonia, rhinovirus. They've kept me in isolation, so I'll have people who can take care of me. Listening to the news should be making my blood pressure skyrocket, but it hasn't given me any blood pressure problems, just a headache. And this too shall pass. My cell phone is working, and I hope to be back soon. So if you know George and want to call him, he would welcome your calls. Chris Horton's husband, Mady, had surgery this past week. Carrie Davis reports that surgery went well, though long and complicated, and there's results that come back in about 3 weeks. So we'll keep in touch with the family. Hopefully all will be well. And Marjorie Wormser writes, my music partner, dear friend Kevin, underwent open heart surgery on Friday for a heart valve repair. These 2 days following the surgery are the toughest. Your healing thoughts and prayers are deeply appreciated. Thank you. Much in our thoughts and for healing, quick healing.
Joe?
Yes.
I just wanted to say that George Hayes is now in rehab at the Oaks in Denville.
At the Oak.
Hospital.
At Denville. Good. Good. Thank you, Diane. A good update to have. We want to pay a visit or get a hold of him. For all of the milestones that have come with us silently in our thoughts, our feelings, we mark this moment of connection and the importance of community in our lives. And we have now a reading at this time. This is a reading by Joy Harjo, who was, actually it's a prayer as well as a poem. And Joy Harjo was at one point the poet laureate for the United States.
I should say that this poem is one of Reverend Joel's favorites, and so we arm wrestled to see who would get to read it. Powerless and Powerful by Joy Harjo, artist, poet, musician, teacher. To pray, you open your whole self to sky, to earth, to sun, to moon, to one whole voice that is you, and know there is more that you can't see, can't hear, can't know, except in moments, steadily growing, and in languages that aren't always sound, but other circles of motion. Like eagle that Sunday morning over Salt River, circled in blue sky, in wind, swept our hearts clean with sacred wings. We see you, see ourselves, and know that we must take the utmost care and kindness in all things. Breathe in, knowing that we are made of all this, and breathe, knowing we are truly blessed because we were born and die soon within a true circle of motion. Like eagle rounding out the morning inside us, we pray that it will be done in beauty, in beauty.
As I think a little bit about feelings, especially strong feelings, and how important it is to be connected to them and how they connect us to each other, I invite you into a moment of meditation or contemplation. I invite you to sit comfortably. Remember the feet. Your feet on the ground will connect you to the earth, its solidity. I invite you to take a breath, a deep breath. meditate in silence for a few moments. Prayers, our thoughts, our longings, our humanity. We say thank you and say amen, so be it, blessed be. Let's sing again together. This is number 305, if you like to use the book. It's De Colores. This is my first time, I think, hearing the drums. I'm so psyched. I invite you to stand in body and spirit.
Springtime with all of their flowers, all the colors. When the sunlight shines out on a rift in the cloud and it showers, all the colors. Yes, the rainbow appears and the storm cloud is touched by the sun. All the colors are bound for the whole world around, everyone under the sun. All the colors, yes, the colors of people parading on by with their banner. All the colors, yes, the colors of pennants and banners and plumes and banner. All the colors, yes, the colors of people now taking their place in the sun. All the colors of life for the whole world around and for everyone under the sun. De colores se listan los campos en la primavera. De colores son los parajitos que laen de la afuera. De colores el arco iris que vemos lucir. Y
Please be seated. You guys sing so well, even in Spanish. Man, it's awesome. We take our offering now. Also a ritual reminder. A reminder that when we create community, we both empower one another and become vulnerable to one another. And that what we bring in this power and vulnerability can make a difference in the world. And as I know about you, sometimes saves lives, literally. Our offering today will be split 50-50 with the Interfaith Food Pantry, a community of neighbors helping neighbors, committed to ending hunger and supporting self-sufficiency. A basket goes around if you would like to leave cash or check. You can donate via text to give number, which is in the order of service, online and here in person. Please select Sunday offering on the menu if you give online. We take our offering. So last Sunday, I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The meeting of all the Unitarian Universalist congregations, when they get together, right now we're going to every other year, that meeting, which was an annual meeting, is called General Assembly, the assembly of all the Unitarian Universalist congregations. General Assembly is a lot of syllables, long words, so it gets shortened typically, and folks who, once you've gone, you just kind of call it GA and forget that somebody's new. They're not going to have any idea what you're saying. It was my first time back at a General Assembly, at a GA, since 2019, before the pandemic. And as an interim minister, I move a lot, and so I was missing a lot of my friends. And it did my heart such good to see people I hadn't seen in 4 years, some of them longer. And I'd seen them on Zoom. I mean, we talked by phone and we'd had Zoom meetings, but there's just something when you can share a meal, or you can go on a walk along a beautiful river, and these faraway friends are right there, where you could take hands and look at each other and smile and hear the nuance in each other's voice that you might not hear otherwise. And I love it when we sing together, and it's just amazing when 2,500 Unitarian Universalists are all singing together at General Assembly at the same time. Man, that feels good. So we also did business, because we are, as a spiritual movement, as a religious movement, one based on democracy. So every congregation is autonomous. There's the people of this congregation decide what happens with the property. There's not some other authority that controls the property or tells us what to believe or how to organize ourselves. And I like that democratic process. Like's not strong enough. I trust it in a way that I don't think there's any other way I could see us doing it that I would trust as much. And we work hard at General Assembly. We elected a new president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, the Reverend Sophia Betancourt. And we elected some new trustees to the Unitarian Universalist Association's board. We use a lot of acronyms sometimes. UUA will sometimes say. 11 syllables in Unitarian Universalist. It's long. And then I did a sermon about a month ago on what we call the Article 2 proposals, the changes to the principles and purposes. And those changes, we were busy. There were about 50 amendments. You can imagine how much time that must have taken. 6 of them actually took, and they were good. I felt like they were great amendments myself. We call it Article 2 because the Unitarian Universalist Association has to have bylaws. This fellowship has bylaws. Any congregation's got to have legal documents, and these are some of the legal documents we have. And because we're a religious movement, we have in Article 2 some sort of statement about how the association itself gathers and around what values. So that's why we've been calling it Article 2. And it passed, actually, with the amendments by 85%, which is a good vote. But they're not adopted yet. We have to vote on them again next year. We want a second set of people practicing democracy together to vote on them yet again, because we want to be really sure about a change like this. And if we vote yes next year at the General Assembly, then these changes become official. We take our principles seriously. We had 7 principles for a long time, and this congregation, as many others, added an 8th principle, working towards anti-racism, anti-oppression, become a people who are better at multiculturalism together. We're not giving up any of the principles. They're all in there, almost word for word in some way, maybe some improvements. For me personally, I'm grateful that there are more verbs in the principles now. They had so few verbs. But what is so very different is that there are practices around the principles now. We use an old religious term from our Unitarian heritage back when we were the Puritans, literally the Puritans, and the word we use is covenant. The covenants around each of the principles are the biggest changes. And what the covenants change is that we don't just have principles now. We make promises about what we're going to do and how we're going to live based on each principle. So practice and July 4th as they come together in my thoughts, and as I tell you about General Assembly, I thought, well, democracy has some practices that it needs for it to survive and to do well. And I'm grateful for this democracy, these United States, as very imperfect as they are, and a country that thinks of itself as based on freedom, still working on giving freedom to everybody who lives here, but as an aspiration. I'm patriotic about the aspirational part of it. And I'm worried about our democracy at a national level. One of our major two parties openly despises democracy, isn't even apologetic about it. Not the entire party. I loved those old Unitarian Republicans, Unitarian Universalist Republicans back in the day. They would understand things like rhetoric and how to talk, and they knew how to deal with anger. They just were really just such a great presence, and they were important mentors in my life. We have a major media network and lots of hesitate to call them media, perhaps propaganda networks. They lie about anything and everything. I think sometimes they just lie because they can, and they like to confuse things. Then there's these so-called Christian folks who are passing laws to hurt transgender and non-binary people. Horrible laws, looking at ways to put people in jail or in prison or separate families. And then the United States Supreme Court made up 2 new laws last week. 2 of their rulings, one of them on student loans and another on equal rights for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer people. Both of those rulings, it was interesting. I'm not a lawyer, and maybe some of the lawyers in the room will correct me a little later on. Both of these cases that came before the court didn't have something called standing. Essentially, there weren't any legal grounds for the court to take on either case. So the court just made stuff up. Justice Elena Kagan disagreed with the decisions, and when she wrote when she wrote about the decision, she wrote a dissent against the decision, and she wrote that the student loans decision also violates the Constitution. Now, that's pretty strong stuff for a justice of the Supreme Court to say. But then she went on to say the decision is a threat to democracy because, she said, the Supreme Court is now making up laws like a Congress instead of deciding on law like a court. With the exception of the court rulings, you know about all the other stuff. I'm not telling you anything new. We live in tough times for democracy. Or as I sometimes joke about an old Chinese proverb, if you don't like someone very much, you wish them to live in interesting times. These times are too interesting for me, actually. So July 4th is approaching. So a spiritual practice, especially a practice that is helpful to make democracy work in our community, in our nation, and here in the fellowship. Practices are helpful to remember because they, especially practices that sustain democracy, are almost all the same practices that we need to engage in, to covenant to do, to use our religious language, they're the same ones that we use when we're taking care of the interconnected web of life. I was talking with one of my old friends at the General Assembly, and they know about some of my experiences, when I was the minister at the Columbine Unitarian Universalist Church, and there was the high school up the street, and there was some violence there, and every time that sort of thing happens again, I get pretty angry. There's good reasons to feel angry. We all probably have reasons to be feeling some anger about some of the things going on in these times. And actually, we all have reasons to feel angry sometimes because things happen we don't like. We lose things that are important to us because of changes, or somebody does something that hurts us. We get angry. But in the practice of democracy, we have to use our anger. This is specifically a practice I'm thinking about this morning, a healthy use of anger. And it's not as easy as it sounds, but it's very important that we learn to do it. I get stuck in my own anger, and I mentioned my experience at the Columbine High School. There was a shooting some years later, about 10 years later, one that was in a town called Newtown in Connecticut. And I was overwhelmed with the anger I was feeling. And I actually found myself making plans to buy some guns. Right? Yeah. I'm glad you laughed, because, really, Joel? And then I thought, wait a minute, this wouldn't preach. The people I depend on, the people I serve, they'd be like, Joel, no, you're not going to do that. And I was grateful that I immediately understood where I was going and what was wrong with it. The anger was driving me, but it was also when I stepped back for a moment and didn't let it consume me. It was a message. I preach about this at least once in every congregation I serve. It's somewhat irritating to be my own damned sermon illustration, but it's useful. But it made me feel better when some years later I was reading about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and found he went through a struggle much like mine, except being having perhaps more wisdom than I, and a reason for a lot more experiences that would cause him to feel anger, realized that he had some wisdom to share from his experiences of injustice and the anger he felt about that. In his autobiography, Dr. King describes an experience he had on a bus trip. It was 1943 in Georgia. And he writes in his autobiography, when I was 14, I traveled from Atlanta to Dublin, Georgia. I was traveling with a dear teacher of mine, Mrs. Bradley, to participate in an oratorical contest. We were on a bus returning to Atlanta, and along the way, some white passengers boarded the bus, and the white driver ordered us to get up and give our seats to white people. We didn't move quickly enough to suit the driver, so he began cursing us. I intended to stay right in that seat. Mrs. Bradley urged me to get up, saying we had to obey the law. And we stood up in the aisle of the bus for 90 miles to Atlanta. That night will never leave my memory. It was the angriest I have ever been in my life. But Mrs. Bradley, the young Dr. King, before he'd earned his degree, she urged the young Martin King to get up. Death was a real possibility. if he didn't get up. And having read this story, and even reading the story again, I'm angry for him. And this was the practice for Dr. King. And as a matter of fact, it's based in, now we know, science, the logic of emotion. Anger is a secondary emotion. It's a feeling that arises out of more basic feelings like sadness or shame. We get angry because we feel we need to protect ourselves and protect the people we love, to keep from losing things that we cherish or people that we cherish. And when sadness or shame or fear then lead us to feel anger, it's a profoundly physical emotion. Thus, the moment we took to meditate after we heard the prayer by Joy Harjo. At birth, our brains are structured to allow our feelings of anger to override our thinking and allow our anger to control our bodies. It was a survival mechanism, the way we evolved. Only by learning and cultural maturation do we create new neural pathways that allow us to see our anger and to redirect it in ways that we have a choice about how we're going to behave. Chronic anger, aggression, something we're trying not to practice, these are learned experiences too. We learned to manage anger often first by the way our parents managed it, and then we're taught by our culture what we're supposed to do with anger. And there are times in human history we're taught to subdue our anger, not to show it ever. There are people who want us not to be aware of our anger, or better yet, they want us to feel angry about what they want us to feel about it. So the spiritual practice is that we transform what anger does when it comes up for us. And this is why Dr. King is such an important source of wisdom for me. Because Dr. King learned to use his anger for a greater good. And so when he found himself swept into the leadership of the civil rights movement in the South, and then ultimately the civil rights movement in the United States, he often would hear folks on the political left proclaim, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. And Dr. King, because of his what he knew from his Christian studies, his theology, his liberal Christian theology, and knew from science, he knew that if you stay angry, you can't pay attention. Dr. King wrote, if you're angry, pay attention. And to do that, you take a breath. First thing you've got to do, because your brain can't pay attention if you're not breathing, and anger wants you to stop breathing. So I find constantly I have to practice listening and breathing when anger comes, so that I can be open to the energy in it and to the transformation I'm seeking, that it's calling me to look for. And then, in the same way, when others are angry at me, I've been practicing how to also take a breath and to listen to the anger that's being communicated to me from you or from other people. This is much harder to do, I've found. And sometimes it may mend hearts, maybe even souls. So I go back when I think about that moment when Harold sat in the sanctuary of the church I was serving at the time. He was shaking. He was furious. And I realized in the moment that, yeah, and he was mad at me because he wasn't sure I even was going to listen to him. And I was receiving a sacred gift from him because he opened his heart to me and his soul. He trusted me to really see him, to really hear him. And I don't know where this wisdom came from because I don't take any credit for thinking this, but I said to him, Harold, thank you for sharing this experience with me. And it's a moment that's burned into my memory, in part because the way his very body spoke to me, my own body felt like it might be having some of the experience along with him. And I could imagine some of it, how it might have felt. I am grateful for what I've learned from Harold, learned from Dr. King, learned from so many other people who have so many reasons to know an anger far greater than any that I would ever justifiably have. But the anger is a message telling us what we cherish, what we love, what we want to care for. Remember to breathe. If you get mad, pay attention. If you get mad, don't stuff it away, even when they tell you to. Don't lose your humanity because someone else is determining what you should be mad about. And don't feed the anger. Take the breath. Listen to your deepest selves. Listen to one another in this community where you care so much for one another. And breathe again as you listen to each other. Don't feed the anger. Listen. And then the moment can come. An openness to wonder. New wisdom. And if you feel stuck, remember that first spiritual practice. It always works. Practice gratitude. Gratitude at the wonder of a powerful feeling. Gratitude for the vulnerability that's possible between us. Gratitude for the gifts of the country and the world we live in. Gratitude that we have such depth of feeling we want to change those parts of it that still cause suffering and hurt to others. And finally, know that there are in these days, and even in the rulings of some of those Supreme Court justices, an intention to keep us angry and to keep us unaware. See the anger, listen to it in ourselves and each other, and don't let them tell you what to be angry about. Don't let them drive our anger toward each other or even our neighbors, even as they may drive our neighbors in anger towards us. It is the working of those who hate democracy. And our greatest power is to live by love, the love of gratitude, and the power of our deepest feelings, sometimes revealed by our deepest rages and angers. Be a powerful people. Go in peace, go in love into the days ahead. Your practice of love and your openness to self and each other will serve you and serve your country well in the days to come. Let's sing together as we close the service. Number 159, This Is My Song. I invite you to stand in body or spirit. Go now into a world where feelings run strong, where hate is sometimes taught, and our love can change and redirect the love, the possibilities of this world. Go out, transform the world as you have, and I know you will continue to go. And know that when it is hard to do, we'll be here again every Sunday throughout the week as well. Go in peace, be in peace. Thank you.
Thank you.